back again. Let's go ahead and finish the rest of this on photosynthesis. So I've given you vocabulary. We've talked about spectrums of light. We've talked about wavelengths and absorption and all of that fun stuff. Now let me go over the actual process of photosynthesis with you. We don't go over nearly as many steps as we generally go over in cellular respiration. Good news. In fact, really what we go over are only 2 steps, because there are 2 steps, and they do have sub-steps, of course, in them, but they're not quite as intense, okay? I do need to give you one more vocabulary word. Photosystem. Photosystems are clusters of pigment molecules, okay? They're clusters of chlorophyll. So these photosystems are found within the thylakoid membranes. Remember that the thylakoids are the individual chewy spree, and they're found within those. And that's where these photons of light are going to strike and make the electrons all happy and excited. All right, so our steps of photosynthesis. One, we have something called Calvin cycle. Back when I was an undergrad, they would call the Calvin cycle sometimes dark reactions. It's not really accurate, but it was a way I think that sometimes they tried to help us remember that the Calvin cycle doesn't require the presence of light to happen. The light reactions, as the name would imply, does require light. Okay, but for the Calvin cycle to happen, you don't need any light striking the plant. That's why I said that sometimes plants do one part of photosynthesis in the day and another at night. There's types of plants that will do light reactions all day long, store up the products that they've made during the light reactions, and then at night, they'll run through the Calvin cycle and finish the process of photosynthesis because the Calvin cycle doesn't need light. So let's go ahead and start with the light reactions. Again, a lot of these terms are already going to be familiar to you, so I don't need to take a whole lot of time going over them. But what I am going to do is switch back over to my PowerPoint. My camera is really not focusing great today, so I apologize. Okay, hopefully you know by now that we see a slide that has a ton of crap on it, not to freak out because we just take it apart. I'm going to show you 2 different slides for what happens with light reactions. Okay. So we talked about photosystems. There's one here and there's one here. And again, these are where a bunch of pigment molecules are going to be contained in this thylakoid membrane. Yes, this first one is called photosystem 2, and the second one is called photosystem 1. And that actually just has to do with the order in which they were discovered. Photosystem 1 was found first. So backwards, yes, I know. Another way you can think about them is P680 and P700. Those kind of have to do with the wavelengths of light that they're best at absorbing, okay? So I'm just going to walk us through this process here, and then I'll give some written notes in a minute. All right, so here's our first photosystem, photosystem 2, and we have photons of high energy light, sunlight. Sunlight is going to strike the photosystems, okay? It gets absorbed by all the pigment molecules there. And when the sunlight strikes those molecules, it makes the electrons jump from a lower state of energy to a high state of energy, okay? They've been energized, kind of like having an electric shock run through them. And that takes them from, again, like I said, this lower state, fling way up to a higher state of energy. Well, does this look familiar? What's happening right here? Electrons appear to be playing hot potato, right? Giving off small amounts of energy at a time. We know what this is. This is an electron transport chain. We already get what it does. We already know from cellular respiration. It also has the same job of powering a proton gradient. The only difference between this and cellular respiration is that the proton gradient is inside the thylakoid. And in cellular respiration, it was pumped the other direction, okay? But same thing's gonna happen. Electrons are passed down an electron transport chain, giving off small amounts of energy in order to push our protons the direction that they don't want to go, where it's crowded, okay? At the end of cellular respiration, at the end of the electron transport chain, oxygen's there to pick up the electrons and it's done. In photosynthesis, once the first electron transport chain is completed, the electrons are sent back to the next photosystem, or photosystem 1, and they're re-energized here. More photons of light strike them again, and they go once more from that low state of energy back up to a high state of energy, and then they're going to go down another electron transport chain with the same things happening, okay? Inside, we have the hydrogen proton gradient. Remember that they have been kicked out of the party. They're not happy about it. It's crowded in here. They're going to go through an ATP synthase, just like they did in cellular respiration. Notice the direction is just opposite. And as they do this, we're going to get some ATP, okay? Notice that we do get ATP first rather than at the end like we did in cellular respiration. I'll introduce you to a new electron carrier for photosynthesis. It's NADP+. In cellular respiration, we had NAD+, right? Well, a good way to remember what it is for photosynthesis is P is the first letter of photosynthesis. So it's NADP+. And when it becomes reduced to form NADPH. You know what an electron carrier is. All we did was add a P to the name of this one, okay? So what happens is we get some NADPH, we know that it's got electrons, and we get some ATP. And that is what's going to be taken into the next step, which is the Calvin cycle. Fun? Okay. Let's come out of here. And back to my whiteboard. Okay. So in the light reactions, I'm going to give some steps. Photons excite electrons in photosystem 2. Okay. Electron transport chain, I'm going to abbreviate. Okay. So from this, we're going to get ATP, we get NADPH, and we actually get some oxygen gas as well from this process. That's light reactions. It's really pretty straightforward. And yes, I know we've got things like photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. That's what PS2 and 1 stand for. But aside from just knowing that that's what those things are called, you already know what an electron transport chain, you already know what an ATP synthase does. You already know those things, so you're not having to relearn anything new, really. Okay, I'm going to come back up here to my diagram. PowerPoint, I mean. Okay. So again, I'm going to walk through it just like I did because I've given you the steps. Oh, no. Move. Okay. Photosystem 2. Light energy strikes the electrons. Electrons are like, yay, so excited, so energized. They go down an electron transport chain, hot potato, releasing small amounts of energy at a time, which allows hydrogen protons to be pumped inside the thylakoid membrane where it's really crowded. Okay. Then those electrons hit photosystem 1, where they are re-excited. Their energy goes way up again. We have another kind of electron transport happening that then is going to give this electron to our NADP+, our electron carrier. That reduces it to form NADPH. Then we have our hydrogen protons, which are not happy about being so crowded. They pass through the ATP synthase, which allows an ADP molecule to be added to a phosphate, or a phosphate to be added to an ADP molecule, which creates ATP. Where does the oxygen come from? So where those electrons come from in the first place to be excited, it's through water. Remember that our formula okay? We're going to see the carbon dioxide in just a minute, but the formula calls for water. Well, that's because right here, water is actually split. When water is split, we get our oxygen, but we also get our hydrogens that have their 1 electron, 1 proton. It's the reverse of what happens at the end of the electron transport chain in cellular respiration. Okay, so we're going to take water apart. When we take water apart, we get our oxygen gas, and then we get the electrons that are sent and the protons, which are part of this transport chain. Okay. All right, let's look at the Calvin cycle. So again, we're going to take our NADPH and we're going to take our ATP and we're going to go to the Calvin cycle. Oh, this is another slide, kind of just another representation of the crowded slide I just showed you. Again, it's showing how the light reactions work. Sunlight hits photosystem 1 or 2, sorry, or P680 electrons, this arrow, yay, excited. Electrons down the proton or electron transport chain, hydrogen protons forced out to form a proton gradient. Electrons hit photosystem 1, re-energized, another electron transport chain where they're handed off to NADP+ to form NADPH. The hydrogens are passing back through an ATP synthase. Which gives us ATP. Okay. All right. Calvin cycle. This should look somewhat familiar to you. Remember what it looks like from cellular respiration. Should look like the citric acid cycle. And it's similar, similar-ish, except for a couple of things that are going to be the opposite of what we had in cellular respiration. But notice that we're going to come in with, here's our carbon dioxide, the 6CO2 from our formula, right? It's going to meet something called RUBP. And it's like a, what does that stand for? See, it's like a bisphosphate or something like that. It's been a minute since I've had to think about what that stands for. But it needs a 6-carbon compound. Carbon's going to come in. We have some more water that's going to be part of this. And we go through the same kind of process of siphoning carbons and in compiling carbons. But I'll talk about the compiling carbons part in a second. Notice as we go around, what's happening here? We're actually going from ATP to ADP. This is the opposite of what happens in cellular respiration at this point. And we only get one per turn. We get a lot more ADP here. Okay, so here we're using the ATP from light reactions, and that's why we get ADP. Now, we're also taking our electron carriers, in this case NADPH, and we're dropping the electrons off here. So NADPH is being oxidized to NADP+, and that's the opposite of what happens to our electron carriers in the citric acid cycle. They get reduced. Okay. We end up with something called G3P, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. G3P is the building block for everything else that plants make. So for our glucose, the C6H12O6, the sucrose, and cellulose, and all of the other things that plants require to survive and that we need to survive, starts here with making these G3P molecules. Okay, so we've got carbon dioxide coming in, we've got water coming in. We also, from the light reactions, have our ATP and our NADPH. As the cycle of carbons continues through the Calvin cycle, our ATP is turned into ADP in 2 places, here and over here. And then we have our electron carrier, NADPH, being oxidized to form NADP+. One of the products that comes out of this cycle is G3P, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. And it's the foundation that's going to be used to make glucose. It takes 2 of these G3P molecules to make our organic molecules. If you remember, glucose, C6H12O6, well, this only has 3 carbons in it. So naturally, we're going to need 2 of these to make 1 glucose. But here's the thing. Plants are not only creating this product, right, this glucose and such, it also has to create the materials needed, the RUBP, for the Calvin cycle to keep happening. So for animals, things that are consumers, we get to take our energy from what we've eaten. Okay, we're not building the process ourselves to make energy. We're taking energy that's already been made and we're converting it. Plants have to produce their own energy and then convert their energy. You understand? So a plant has to first go through the light reactions where it's creating its energy, ATP, and then it has to go through the Calvin cycle where it produces the things that it needs to live out of the ATP. We're just going to produce ATP right from something that we eat. Okay? So plants have this super double process having to happen because they're not going to get those nutrients from someplace else where they can just convert it. They have to make it, then convert it. Okay? And again, not only are they trying to produce glucose, but they also have to keep enough carbon to generate this RUBP in this cycle. So they're doing 4 times the work that's happening in cellular respiration. Okay, again, Calvin cycle, as you can see, there's no light here, no light needed. And again, why I said some plants do light reactions all day, store up the ATP and the NADPH, and then do the Calvin cycle at night, where they take the energy they've made and then convert the energy. Okay? That's actually it. So that's it on photosynthesis. If you ever take a plant biology course, you will go into more depth on this. But honestly, these are the basics. I mean, even this slide here, if you want an overview to review for photosynthesis, it kind of says what's happening right here. Light reactions carried out by molecules in the thylakoid membrane convert light energy to the chemical energy of ATP, plus our electron carrier reduced NADPH. Water is split here and oxygen is released into the atmosphere because of it. Calvin cycle happens in the stroma. I didn't remember to mention that part, but I'll put it in the notes. The Calvin cycle uses the ATP and the NADPH from the light reactions, and it's going to convert that carbon dioxide, all those carbons, eventually to G3P, the building block for all of the other organic molecules that are going to be made in the plant. And then the ADP that's been used, as well as the NADP plus and the phosphate that was used from the ADP, all go back to the light reactions to be used in those regeneration of more ATP and ADPH. Okay. All right, that was fun. Let me go here and type out my notes. So we have carbon dioxide used to create G3P. And then we have okay. And I'll say that it takes kind of it. I will say up here though that for our light reactions, this. Okay. Anything else to point out here? I mean, I've tried to point it out kind of when I was telling you how much extra work the plant does compared to what we do, because the plant has to have that extra step of making the energy first so that it can be converted. We don't have that. You can see then why everything kind of depends on our producers. And our producers in our ecosystem are photosynthetic organisms, okay? So if the producers die out, then the consumers are going to be soon to follow, because no matter what level consumer you are, you're still dependent upon your producers, okay? So if you run out of the products of what our producers make, there's nothing to power cellular respiration in the consumers. And you can see that life on Earth would shut down, okay? It's one of the things that they think may have happened with dinosaur extinction. And actually there's evidence that it's happened at other points in Earth's history as well, that there's been some kind of meteor strike that threw so much dust and debris into the atmosphere for such a prolonged period of time, like years, that it significantly reduced how much photosynthesis could take place, and significantly reduced then how many producers were able to actually produce. And that would have severely limited life on Earth. And I believe that that was the cause of one of the big five. The big five refers to mass extinction events that have taken place throughout Earth's history, which we're actually going to talk about in a few chapters. So that's it. Yep, that's all I got on photosynthesis, guys. Not that bad. As always, if you're uncomfortable, please reach out to me, especially with the midterm coming up. Let's go over this in person and kind of make it more comfortable. Okay, that's it for this week. Talk to you soon.